On the 10th of June 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 started like any other day. The co-pilot performed the walk-around before flight and was the pilot flying during the takeoff. Once established in the climb, Captain was handling the aircraft in accordance with the operator's normal operating procedures. At this stage, both pilots released their shoulder harness, and Captain had loosened his lap strap. As the aircraft was climbing through 17,300 feet, there was a loud bang and the fuselage was filled with condensation mist, and the aircraft experienced sudden loss of the left-hand windscreen. It was once apparent to the cabin crew that an explosive decompression had occurred. The captain was partially sucked out of the windscreen aperture, and the flight deck door had been blown into the flight deck. The number 3 steward, who had been working on the cabin side of the door, rushed onto the flight deck and grasped the captain round his waist to hold onto him. The co-pilot immediately attempted to control the aircraft and, once he had regained control, initiated a rapid descent to flight level 110. He re-engaged the autopilot, which had become disconnected by displacement of the control column during the captain's partial egress. Co-pilot made a distress call on the frequency in use, but he was unable to hear its acknowledgement due to noise of rushing air on the flight deck. Meanwhile, the aircraft had descended to flight level 100 and slowed down to about 150 knots. The co-pilot had requested radar vectors to the nearest airport, and had been turned towards Southampton Airport and eventually transferred to their approach frequency. Having verified that there was sufficient runway length available for landing, the co-pilot maneuvered the aircraft onto a visual final approach and completed a successful landing and stopped on the runway. Accident investigation report revealed that windscreen had been installed during the night prior to the flight, and that the procedure had been approved by the shift maintenance manager. However, 84 of the 90 windscreen retention bolts were smaller in diameter, while the remaining 6 were short in length than the required. The left windscreen was blown out under effects of the cabin pressure when it overcame the retention of the smaller securing bolts. The investigation concluded that, during the fitment of the windscreen, the shift maintenance manager was confronted with certain situations which made his job more difficult. Incorrect bolts had been used in the previous installation. Insufficient stock of required bolts, incorrect, but demonstrably adequate, existed in the carousel in the stores at the Eastern Apron. A number of procedures were ignored and some poor trade practices followed. Non-conformity with British Airways standards was also demonstrated. Use of unsuitable equipment took place. For the first time in UK's history, the investigation followed the human factors approach and identified the following causal factors. A safety-critical task was undertaken by one individual, who also carried total responsibility to ensure the quality of work, and the installation was not tested until the aircraft was airborne on a passenger-carrying flight. The shift maintenance manager's potential to ensure quality in the windscreen fitting process was eroded by his inadequate care, poor trade practices, failure to adhere to company standards, and use of unsuitable equipment, which were judged symptomatic of a longer-term failure by him to observe promulgated procedures. The British Airways local management, product samples, and quality audits had not detected the existence of inadequate standards employed by the shift maintenance manager, because they did not monitor directly the working practices of shift maintenance managers. The investigation also observed that the crew of British Airways Flight 5390 were faced with an instantaneous and unforeseen emergency. The combined actions of the co-pilot and the cabin crew successfully averted what could have been a major disaster.